Good morning, leaders. Welcome to today's panel discussion on creating climate champions by empowering school leaders to enhance student learning through climate literacy. And perhaps there's no better occasion to have this discussion than today, which is the World Environment Day. Our esteemed panelists today are Christine Osden, the Global Director of Climate Education at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. As our first ever Global Director, Christine's work is focused on how we can use climate education and engagement to create, through a range of products, services, and partnerships, desired outcomes. She works with colleagues across the organization, the University of Cambridge, and a wide range of education stakeholders to drive impact. Followed by Professor Geeta G. Kingdon, President and MD of City Montessori School, as well as a professor at the University College London. She wears many hats, holding a chair in education economics and international development. She has a BSc degree in economics from the LSE and a DPhil from the prestigious Oxford University. Since 2010, she has modernized the school while preserving its cultural heritage and driving focused outcomes on climate and sustainability. The discussion today will be steered by Mr. Arun Rajamani, who is our Managing Director for South Asia at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. Arun has played a crucial role in leading our ethically driven not-for-profit organization in delivering world-class academic research, learning, and assessment globally. With over 28 years of experience in the education sector, he specializes in business development and marketing management. Arun emphasizes the importance of a skilled team, dedication to perfection and honesty, and timely decision-making for achieving success. So, without further ado, I now hand it over to Arun to steer the exchange. Thank you.
And thank you for the wonderful introduction to all of us here. As you said, we could have chosen a better day for this panel discussion on the World Environment Day with the topic that we have of understanding how could really climate education in the context of the looming climate crisis that's impacting our world, how could that be even looked at to create climate champions? I think this is a wonderful topic for us to look at. I'd start by setting a context to say that how real is climate change today? There are people who really believe that climate change is already in there, and there are skeptics who say that maybe not. But whatever it is, if you just look around us today in our current context, the whole of North India today is reeling under an unprecedented heat wave. At the same time, we are having floods in Kerala. In November last year, we had unprecedented floods in Tamil Nadu, while just a month ago in Karnataka, water tables had dried up and there was absolutely no drinking water available. Now, if you look at what is really happening across us, there are severe weather impact, challenges that we see. We're seeing increasing sea levels. We are seeing the erosion of biodiversity. All of this is pointing to a trend that says that maybe climate change is now looking more and more real for all of us. Just in the last 2 decades alone, over 3,300 severe weather incidents were reported in South Asia alone. That makes it about 20 a year. And how much more frequent could this get for us? So if we assume that all of these problems need to be solved, and this is the crisis that we're dealing with, the world needs to come together very quickly to be doing this. We already see that there are several movements now underway globally to be addressing the challenges of climate crisis. But one thing is certain. People of my generation and many other people who are sitting on this call today, their generations are not alone going to be able to solve this, because it takes many, many decades to solve what has been a crisis that's evolved over hundreds of years. Now, if we are going to then depend upon not just our generations, but the future generations to come, it becomes even more important for the future generations to be equipped with the knowledge, the skills, and the awareness of what climate education means, what climate change means, and what are the challenges that they're going to be encountering with, so that they can solve that problems more appropriately. So therefore, educating future generations is going to become one of the key aspects of how we think about sustainability in the future. So we definitely need the future generations to be equipped with the knowledge and the skills required. And therefore, as our topic suggests today, we will need more climate scientists. We are going to be needing more climate practitioners. We're also going to be needing a lot of climate champions and climate activists who can basically bring climate change to the forefront. And that's, I think, what the education system now needs to be able to deliver. So, if we understand then the role of education and how important it is going to be in shaping future leaders, we should also understand today the role that educators would play in bringing that into the forefront. For educators now, we will need to understand that their role is not just about preparing students for a changing world. It's also about ensuring that we are able to prepare students for a more sustainable world in addition to a changing world. And in order for us to be doing that, we have to understand how we could use climate education in the context of us looking at driving better learning outcomes or student outcomes. Educators are keen to understand how would this now coexist with student well-being? How would this coexist with the ability to create societal impact? And this is something that not all of us are very clear about. And we need to look for answers where educators can then be guided towards bringing these into the forefront. As we think about it also, boards such as Cambridge and also several other boards across the world are thinking about bringing climate change into the mainstream curriculum. There are design workshops, there's design work that's underway to seeing how could climate curriculum become mainstream across several aspects of teaching and learning today, across all grades, perhaps across all forms of curriculum. The NEP talks about it quite a bit. The NEP is now clearly referencing how they could bring climate change right from, or climate education right from, grade one onwards. They're talking about it becoming more experiential. The NEP prescribes how they could use skills such as critical thinking and problem solving, and becoming more practice oriented, programs to be implemented. Now, I think the vision looks very good, but we also do need to understand that by the time this becomes mainstream and it's implemented in the classroom, it's going to take a decade or more. So how much could we then wait? Is missing a decade before this becomes mainstream good for us today? Because this would basically mean one entire generation would have gone through the schooling system and not becoming really climate aware. So I think it's important now to realize the urgency of bringing something in while boards are now starting to bring this into a more formal curriculum structure. So what it really means is educators need to think about this climate education as becoming more informal learning, more non-curricular, and we'll have to bring that into the classroom. But it's easier said than done, because the moment we bring in something which is non-curricular into our classroom, we deal with its own set of challenges. How do we bring it into the timetable? How do we ensure that there's motivation for students? How do we ensure that we're able to bring in aspects of involving them in practical aspects? It's not going to be easy. Now, there are several questions to be answered, and I think that's why we have two very eminent panelists with us, both Christine and Geeta, Professor Geeta, who've been doing a lot of work in this area. And I think I'm just going to dive right in and direct these questions at them. And you also have the ability to ask all those questions. So there is a window where you could type your questions in. There's an email ID that's already been published in your Zoom calendar, which you could type your questions and send them to. And we're happy to answer them towards the end of this session. So essentially today's, the next 40 minutes, we're going to spread this or split this into four broad topics. Understanding the impact of climate change and the impact and the need for climate education in that context. Second, what does climate education really mean? How should we define that in a holistic model? So that is the second topic that we will discuss. The third is, how do we really galvanize student action there? Should it just be a theoretical course, or should we really bring skills-oriented programs where students can participate? And we're going to discuss a lot about that. And the last is, for those students who really view climate to be a serious area for them to invest in, what are the career opportunities available? So hopefully these four topics would give all of you as educators who logged on to this call today some idea of how you could steer climate education and how could you implement that in your classroom going forward. So that's really what we have. I'm sure it's going to be an exciting conversation. So feel free, please stay engaged and feel free to ask your questions towards the end. So jumping right in, my first question to Christine in the first topic that we have. Christine, you've been, part of running a mainstream education board, and then you shifted to actually making climate education as your passion now. I'm sure you had several reasons to be shifting from running a school board to getting into climate education. So you probably looked at both worlds. You've looked at the education world in terms of how curriculum is implemented, and now you're looking at the need to bring in climate education into the classroom. Where do you see the looming climate crisis today globally? And in that context, where do you believe climate education has a role to play?
Thank you, Aaron, and happy World Environment Day to everyone. First of all, Aaron, I think that was a really helpful scene setting from you. Thank you very much for that. And so to build on that in terms of where do I see the climate crisis, and at the risk of taking us down quite a tricky, a sort of a complex, potentially quite negative sort of scenario, but really how I see the climate crisis is like a number of people, many people actually, is in terms of a set of interrelated crises. Some people call it a polycrisis, where we've got the climate crisis, but we've also got a crisis of biodiversity, a nature crisis, a crisis of inequality. Inequality and inequity is quite a significant theme when we talk about climate change. A crisis of human rights, challenges with security, shelter, food, housing, basic human rights. So, in that context of a polycrisis, the causes of it equally, the causes of the crisis are equally diverse. Of course, we've got those well-documented and well-evidenced causes around climate crisis with regard to what scientists refer to as the enhanced greenhouse gas effect. So yes, the causes include the rise in emissions through human activity, through, again, post-industrial revolution, electricity production, land use, food systems, transport, construction. So that scientific case behind contemporary climate change, it is well documented, and those causes are there. But if we need to think about the causes more broadly, because this impacts also education. The causes are more complex than that, in terms of if these things haven't been the cause, at least now they aggravate in that we've got economic models of consumption and production that are aggravating the challenge, lifestyle choices, cultural norms, even political ideologies. So there's so many things that are actually driving some of these crises that we see. And, in terms of the impact of this, I think one very important thing to stress, and I'll just link that to education as well, is that although this is a global issue, the impacts of the climate crisis are absolutely experienced locally, sometimes hyperlocally, as well as nationally, rather than internationally. So the impacts are diverse and deeply uneven in different parts of a single country or across a region or the world. And in terms of the importance of education, to come back to your question, Aaron, education plays a critical role in, first of all, helping us understand the causes, but also critically in finding solutions. And I think it's really, really important that we advocate for the importance of education. A lot of the interventions and solutions and the dialogue around climate change is at sectoral level. And we've got to make it clear that education is the capacity builder that straddles all those sectoral opportunities.
Thank you, Christine. That was quite comprehensive. I mean, polycrisis, when looking at interrelated issues and moving, so many different dimensions of what could, what contribute the causal effects of causes and effects of climate change. I think this is quite complex for an educator to understand in terms of how to bring that in. So let me then go to Professor Geeta. When Christine talks about the polycrisis and she talks about the economic models, the cultural issues, the political issues that contribute towards some aspects of it, the consumption models. As a country, we are at the thresholds of growth. For us, economic growth is very critical because one of the aspects she talked about was inequality and equity. And here we are as a country trying to figure out, or as a region, I would say, how do we bring more equity into our demographic profiles and our economic strata. But on the same time, we don't hear enough about climate change because there are so many other issues that overtake climate change. So as an educator now, and having led a number of non-curricular programs in your schools, how would you see today climate becoming more mainstream? And how do you think we can bring the urgency for climate education into our classrooms today, in at least in an Indian context?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Well, the fact that the problem is a urgent one, I think the science behind it, the evidence for it, even those die-hard climate change deniers have now thrown in the towel and come to the realization that really it's overwhelming. The evidence is overwhelming, and now it is even being felt in daily lives across the world, across the communities. So I think that the scale of the challenge is now, I think, undeniable. And I think to describe it as a polycrisis, I think is a very apt description. And the problem is compounded by the fact that there are now sort of psychological kind of overtones to it, in the sense that those who understand the scale of the crisis also feel that it is there's a sort of sense of some people are depressed about it, some people are fatalistic about it, some people feel helpless, that even if they even if they could change their lifestyles, even if they could at the individual level take some actions, what difference is that going to make to the totality of it? So that can lead to a sense of what can be done about it, a sense of helplessness. And some people, are placing their faith in government, that the government can, solve the crisis. Some are placing their faith in science, the fact that maybe science will come up with some solutions. But I think the complexity of the problem is such that I think it is really important now that the complexity and the urgency of it is such that I think it's really important now that, if we wait to make everybody aware, it's going to be very difficult. But I think schools can play a major role in helping young people understand, those who will be very shortly the decision makers of tomorrow and the citizenry. So I think that schools can play a really important role in increasing awareness, but it's not only increasing awareness, in bringing about some sort of an intrinsic motivation for change. It's not just the awareness of the knowledge of the existence of climate change, knowledge of the facts and figures and the statistics, and understanding the science, or even understanding the causes. I think the inherent desire to effect change, that has to be created by schools. Of course, it's a big challenge. How does one do it?
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I couldn't agree more, because I guess if we could shape minds, when the minds are young, and when, there's an ability for students to absorb, understand, and be curious, I think that's the best time that we could shape future thinking and future leaders. And I think the other point that you made was quite interesting, that a bit of everything is going to be required for a solution to be found. There has to be, leaning towards science. There has to be leaning towards technology. Perhaps there's going to be leaning towards education as well, for us to solve, this issue related to the polycrisis that Christine very aptly mentioned. And I'll come back to you, because there's one point that I wanted to, go into a little bit deeper, Professor Geeta, in terms of what you said, but I'll come back to you on that one. Going back to the point that, Christine, you made about looking at how education can, create solutions, understanding the causes and creating solutions. And you also mentioned that there are scientific evidences that are available today for us to be doing so, from the interrelated issues that we talked about. But what should an education system look like, or a program look like? Should it just be on the basis of scientific data, or should it go beyond it? And as Professor Geeta mentioned, there's a bit of everything to be covered there. So how should we think about components, or the constituents of a climate education program?
Thank you, Aaron. And just before I talk about that, I want to come back to the, we've mentioned already the complexity of the situation, but I do want to stress that it actually annoys me when people talk about things being complex as though we can't do something about it. So and I'm conscious myself of talking about complex, but let's not underestimate the power of education and the power of educators and teaching and learning. So although I may have started framing this as a polycrisis and complex, I certainly believe that the education community has the wherewithal to tackle this. So I want to put that out there. And how could they tackle this? To your question, Aaron, really thinking about what, and as Professor Geeta said, thinking about what sort of a broader, some people might call it a holistic climate education program, the sort of the aspects that it should contain. Well, certainly for sure, it should contain accurate, up-to-date scientific knowledge. And that is really important, again, to the point you made earlier, Aaron, about how long it takes things to move into the education system and cycle. We've got to be conscious that some of the things that are in our textbooks at the moment may actually be incorrectly framed at this point. We need to be very clear about the accuracy and the up-to-date nature of our scientific content, which we know at Cambridge, that's an absolute focus for us. Beyond that, the things we need to look at are, the opportunity that climate change education can be multidisciplinary, it can be across age ranges, it can be, and it should be absolutely inclusive of different student contexts. And importantly, it needs to be institution-wide. Evidence shows us that leadership needs to openly commit to climate change education and what it wants to achieve with that for success across the whole school. I would suggest that a climate change education program needs to be action orientated, and we're going to talk more about action later on, I know, Aaron, but that's empowering and also career related, and I know we're going to come back to that. One aspect that we also need to consider, and I think this is quite challenging, is that the work we do around climate change education needs to grab hold of that inequality and inequity perspective. So how do we use our education system to promote justice or just actions? And I think that's quite a challenge. Then importantly, and as a board, I absolutely believe that our climate change education needs to be assessed and recognised as valuable. I think that is absolutely crucial. What do we also need to do? We need to understand that there will be controversial aspects within climate change education. So we need to look at how we use scientific evidence there. Back to the first point about scientific evidence. Also, I think within this, because there are controversial aspects of different viewpoints within climate change education, really an education that develops students' understandings of arguments from different perspectives and enables students to actually develop their own informed opinions is crucial. Let me just finish, Aaron, by also saying that obviously the climate change education that we advocate for needs to be driven by contextual needs. So, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So Singapore, its climate change education focus at the moment is not on knowledge, because actually when you look at the Singapore system and you look at its knowledge within international assessments such as PISA, knowledge levels within the Singapore education system are great. But what the challenge they have in Singapore is actually translating that knowledge into meaningful environmental action. So the Singapore climate change work and sustainability work focuses on behavioural aspects and nudge, if you will, the nudge theory that some colleagues may have heard about. Different to that, let's take a look at the Maldives, where they're wonderful. They have a wonderful project called Fehimad Harusa, their Green Schools project, which looks to promote eco-literacy, reduce the environmental footprint, and really importantly, it has climate prosperity at the focus. And I love the fact that they've got prosperity, the positivity, the importance of connecting climate change action to livelihoods. And maybe we'll talk about that later. I hope that answers your question to a degree, Aaron.
No, you did, and I think you pointed out to a number of very important aspects, right? When you talk about multidisciplinary, areas of learning that cuts across age ranges, has to be institution wide. It has to have, a strong sense of leadership commitment. It has to be action oriented programs. This is something where, if it allows for students to be really making informed decisions, it basically means that students will have to not just depend upon what's taught in the classroom, but also look at doing a lot of research themselves, being very, critical thinking oriented. It
Yes.
also means how do, the teachers really enable that kind of a thought process to come into the classroom. And we are talking about a multitude of areas that we need to bring into this context to make sure that the outcome is positive. The examples you gave, either of Singapore or the Maldives doing that, are great, because this is where it's not just institutional at the school level, but it's also, the state which is putting in a significant amount of focus. So thank you. I mean, this is a really good articulation of what could a holistic program look like. But in that context, I just want to go across to Professor Geeta now to, when we talk about all of this today, Professor Geeta, we are now, I wouldn't use the word struggling, but I think we are on a learning curve today as a country where, with the new education policy that's come in, we are now figuring out how do we implement interdisciplinary programs, credit-based programs, how do we bring in skills-oriented learning into the classroom. All these changes that we are now bringing about are now being implemented. Now, this is in the context of all these programs that we are implementing as educators, which have a qualification associated, where the curriculum is clearly defined, and this is something we need to do. Now, what Christine talked about is likely to remain non-curricular for a while. Now, you've been a pioneer in implementing non-curricular programs in your schools. How do you think what Christine talked about in terms of looking at holistic education across these different dimensions, from research-oriented learning to practice to actually doing, bringing the teacher into the forefront, to how do you think we can bring this in? And what do you think would be some of the challenges that educators have to think about overcoming as they look to implementing this kind of a program?
Yeah. Luckily, our national education policy has, gives credence to, has taken, account of the goal 4 of the SDGs, the educational goal, with its 7 indicators. One of those 7 indicators is global citizenship education. Now, climate change education is very much one of the major aspects of global citizenship education. That the idea that every single school in the world must, teach global citizenship education. So and the other thing, of course, the NEP talks about is the importance of integrated learning. Instead of teaching, thinking of different subjects as being in different silos and they are not interconnected with each other, it emphasizes integrated learning. It emphasizes, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity. So the idea that, we can marry these two things, the fact that global citizenship education is not taught best if it's theoretical. It is taught best when it is extremely applied, when it invokes higher order thinking skills, when students are actively engaged in exploring an idea. Because the reason for that is that this particular topic of climate change education, I think it lends itself extremely well to a more critical thinking approach rather than a rote learning or just acquiring of facts approach. Because the objective here is not just, to do well in some examination. The objective here is to really imbibe and to understand the issue of climate change, and then not just to understand it, for it to also then translate into action. So I think that for that reason, in order to help students develop the conviction that they must do something about it, so their hearts and minds are changed, I think for that we need a different kind of a approach to education, which is the problem solving approach, the critical thinking approach, the approach whereby they sit together and they do the research for it. They have a question in mind, and they are, enabled, they're assisted to develop their understanding and assisted to develop their, their values, even, I would say, around it. How does it behove me to act? Armed with this knowledge that I now have, how does it behove me to act? Or what does it behove me to do in terms of, my choice of course, college, and career as well? So I think for that, to galvanize that, to ignite that internal intrinsic motivation, I think it's important that when we talk about climate change, and the non-curricular parts. Now, coming to your question about how we've done it in our own school, um, not that we can say that we're doing it very well. We would like to do much more, but yes, we have been doing global citizenship education concepts. We've been implementing for a long time. The founding motto of our school was Jai Jagat 65 years ago, and the idea of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, the idea that the whole earth is one family, and therefore we care about the welfare of everybody in the family, including those who may not be very nearby. It's a big family. It's the whole earth is the family. So I think that invoking these concepts, pressing them into the service of global, climate change education. I think these are important things that we have done. We have related the climate education agenda in our school with some of the precepts that arise from our own cultural heritage, such as I said, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam and the idea of Jai Jagat, which Mahatma Gandhi and Vinoba Bhave brought. So we've got, eco clubs. Again, when we talk about eco clubs, I'd like to just give this example, how it is that, practical kind of approach to learning can help. So for instance, we took the Center for Science and Environment, Delhi-based, environmental NGO. We took their book, which was on, for school children, how to make them aware. This is in 2011, we took that. And we implemented that in the sense that students have been doing, for example, energy audits. So reading the electricity meter, learning how to read the electricity meter, record it, and seeing it every month, how that is changing. And therefore working out what is the total energy usage, dividing that by the number of students. So seeing the footprint. And then perhaps making some resolutions about whether we can reduce this footprint by some percentage, 2%, for instance. Can we do that in the next year as a goal-setting exercise? Similarly, when it comes to water audit, maths, would be very boring if we just learned about volume without seeing anything practical. But as part of the Eco Club, students go up to the water tanks, they measure the circumference, they work out what the diameter is going to be. They work out, based on the formula, what the area is going to be. They measure the height, they multiply the two things, and they understand the concept of volume better through doing it in this way. So I think we have to, find ways that are both curricular and non-curricular. Of course, in any school, there are so many spaces in which we can have, non-curricular ways of imparting climate change education, school assemblies, model class presentations, interactions when parents are coming to the school, annual days, and even otherwise. So I think, the celebration of UN days, the Environment Day, the Groundwater Week, and so on and so forth, the Earth Day. So I think we need to tap into, all schools can do this. They can tap into those opportunities for bringing in climate change education.
That's something fascinating you're talking about, because, if I look at how you've implemented this, right, you looked at taking a program and you're linking it back to either curricular or non-curricular models, and you're thinking about how do you bring the practice-oriented learning, which is more experiential learning there. I can understand, student motivation when it comes down to the curricular aligned programs, because there is an examination, there's a qualification associated. So parents and students are more oriented towards that. There's an intrinsic motivation for teachers too, to be looking at curricular related programs. But I think in the context of climate education, which is likely to remain non-curricular, maybe the question I have for you is, through the experience you have had of implementing the global citizenship education program, if you can draw a parallel to climate education, if you were to attempt doing it there, how do you look at student motivation? How do you look at bringing the aspect of student motivation to bear as far as their immersion into climate change is going to be concerned? And what do you think would be the motivation for students to be doing a program like this? Because that's, I think, one big area where educators would like to understand more, for them to be thinking about programs to be implemented in their schools.
I think, students love to learn when when they can see the relevance of the learning to their lives. So I think it's really important for educators to connect whatever it is that they're teaching in class, whatever subject matter it may be, whichever subject it may be, if they can relate that to real life. And I think it's really important for educators to do that in order to bring learning to life and to generate student interest. So I think we need to move more towards things like experiential learning projects, which integrate several subjects, 2, 3, 4 subjects, and where there is, where it is definitely possible, even in a curricular manner, to bring in aspects of climate change. So, if it's a project that's integrating, physics and geography and English and computers, for example. So, the topics that, in climate change, the science that is related to climate change, it most certainly has so many curricular aspects. Then, bringing in, so when we are setting up the experiential learning project, the topics that we pick up, relating those to climate change, and then building them in quite consciously into the experiential learning programs. I think that is a very viable way. That's the way that we have tried to do it. When we say we are doing GCE, Global Citizenship Education, how we've tried to mainstream it is through the modality of the experiential learning projects.
Thank you. I think you touched upon a few very important topics again, in terms of bringing climate across subjects to making sure that it can really work, and that's where I think the practicality of it of learning also comes in. Maybe at this stage, I just want to redirect that question now to Christine. Christine, as you're thinking about bringing in a global climate education program, how much are you thinking about education from a perspective of the students' recognition? How do students really look at the skills that they acquire? How does it lead back to their personal development? So beyond what I think the discipline is, where does this lead into student development and student progression? How are you thinking about that from a perspective of the program that you would advocate to schools?
Thanks, Aaron. I think I'm going to build on quite a lot of what Professor Geeta said here, actually, in terms of that educational experience and personal development. Because again, as Professor Geeta pointed out, the climate education does bring together distinct and quite long established approaches such as global education, environment education, and citizenship education there. And really, this is about, we want the educational experience to shape students' abilities, to enable them to progress and thrive and have a positive impact in society. And, no better context, no more urgent context than that of the climate crisis, I'd say. And involvement in appropriate climate action, as Professor Geeta pointed out, really does directly deliver that. It's a real life application of these transferable skills: creative problem solving, communication, collaboration, and also potentially it is achieving the highest order of skills, which is that of synthesis, through work, co-curricular work around climate change and around climate education. We're potentially asking students to synthesize all the knowledge, all the skills, and apply them to a real life urgent challenge. Was there a part of your question that I didn't answer there, Aaron?
No, I think you did answer that. I was also thinking about from a perspective of, maybe I'll just lead this to another question, and this can help us, get some more clarity on that. So while you talked about the synthesis of the knowledge that they have into action, which means that they are trying to apply the knowledge in a real crisis, which is climate education, and then climate change, and then the gaining the experience. It also leads to their own personal development. It leads to their, I would say, aspects of and building their education portfolio as they build that. How realistic today is it to think about these experiences leading up to, let's say, professions that or careers that students can choose to take as far as climate change is concerned? Do you think there's a pathway that students from schools, by working through these programs, can start aspiring for as they think about careers in the future?
Yeah. So let me come to pathways and careers. But before I do that, let me use as a stepping stone. I think recognition, this sort of action that we're talking about here, that myself and Professor Geeta have been talking about, I'll go back to a point I made earlier. I think it's absolutely crucial that we find a way to recognise that within the student experience and the personal and professional development. You know, there is a point that this needs to be recognised. For this to be seen as valuable, this needs to be formally recognised. So let's leave that one there. Let's leave that one there for the moment. But also, we do need to build pathways. And again, to this point, where we've talked about the challenge of urgency and the challenge that all education systems have around speed, we need to force some things. We need to make some things happen. So, in terms of pathways, we need to call out the sectors that we know will transform, need to be transformed for us to make the transition that we need to make for a more sustainable future. And we know those sectors: they're energy, they're food and agriculture, the built environment, construction and design, resource management, transport. So we know those sectors, and we also know that finance will play a transformational role in supporting the innovation here. And we also know we'll need scientists and we'll need engineers across all those areas to find us with solutions there. So I think there are certain. I'm going to talk about sort of skills, Aaron. I think there are certain new careers that will start to emerge. So, for example, within or will start to take more prominence. So, for example, in engineering, I think water engineering, for example, I think water engineering will become far more to the forefront than it has. Agriculture is going to be, and the food sector is going to be phenomenally important. If we think that a third of the world's emissions come from food systems, and I think this will, this will deliver new careers. So, for example, the ILO report, the most recent ILO report, the International Labour Organization report on this, talks about agricultural meteorologists, soil conservationists, so new technical professions that will come about. So I absolutely think that will happen. Also in the public sector, I think this will be really important in the public sector. Environmental policy analysts will need far more of those in the public sector. So again, as educators, we need to work out how we deliver those pathways. But I also think that we need to be aware that there will be a reframing of mainstream skills within industries, within greening industries. So, for example, let me take tourism, fashion. The skills that will be needed to deliver those sectors in a sustainable fashion will become mainstream. I don't think it's all about a very specific technical set of new skills. I think there's also all the skills that we've always done need to be recontextualized. I hesitate to use the expression green skills because, Aaron, I think it can be divisive. I think people can say, well, that's not me. So I think there are some new technical job opportunities, and I think we need to recontextualize skills and make sure our educational pathways deliver that.
I just wanted to add something to this, if I may.
Please.
Just wanted to say, this point that Christine made at the opening of this last point that she made, which is about the importance of recognizing, and giving it salience. If children have done some environmental related work or project or some action, I think it's important to recognize that. And I'll give you an example of this. That for instance, in India, there is the NCC, the National Cadet Corps, and young people at school level, when they do that, they get recognized for it in terms of jobs in government, for example, in the defense services. Similarly, the International Award for Young People, what we call the Duke of Edinburgh in the UK, it's called the Duke of Edinburgh, but internationally, the International Award for Young People. So when young people do that, they are giving us some sort of a signal about what kind of people they are, what kind of a person they are. And that does count for university admissions. And I'll give you an example straight from our own school. One of our students last year, her name is Ananya Chaudhary. She got into Harvard University for an undergraduate degree on full scholarship, 100% scholarship. And when students realized that one of the things that that had helped her application a great deal at Harvard was the fact that she had established an environmental NGO, 4 or 5 years before, 3 4 years before, called the Bhumi Initiative. When the students realized that that had cut a lot of ice, at Harvard in terms of admission, they became much more interested. Of course, it's doing the right deed maybe for the wrong reason, because you're getting the recognition for it rather than necessarily because it comes intrinsically. But I think that it just goes to show that I think recognizing the importance of something will give it, and recognizing them, praising them, awarding them for environmental work. I think that can be a great motivator for young people. So I think that we should do that in schools. That's a really powerful point.
And I think I agree with you. And I think the recognition also spawns a lot of action-oriented engagement from students, because that's when they also realize that their work gets not only recognized, for admissions, but also gets recognized for their contribution to the societal impact. And usually that's the hardest thing for students to do. But I think that would be a great area for us, I think, as educators to solve for, not the climate crisis, but at least the recognition aspect, if we can get there. So I want to sort of, the last question here, because I realize we're running out of time, is to you, Professor Geeta, that if I took, what Christine mentioned and you built on it in terms of the recognition aspect, but there are also these new careers that are emerging, which is relatively unknown, because in the context of India, if I look at it, and because we work with so many schools across the country, we still see a lot of parents who aspire for the children to get into the same engineering and medicine and law. These are the traditional, programs where a majority of our students are still oriented towards. Now, if we have to bring, with recognition, of course, if we have to bring these sort of programs in, how do we really show them the pathway of where these future career opportunities could lie that could potentially strengthen the motivation that you talked about earlier, in terms of students wanting to invest their time to learn new skills, because they know that it's going to have some impact in their lives at a later point in time? What do you think educators should do to show them, or show students and parents, I would say both, the vision of what that future could look like for their children, which is non-traditional?
I think this is a really important aspect, because for one thing, many schools, most schools perhaps, I don't know about most, but many schools have career counselors. So I think it's important for our career counselors to be aware of, and it's incumbent on us as people who run schools to ensure that our career counselors are equipped with that knowledge, not only of the existence of such courses at universities, and increasingly universities are providing even undergrad courses on sustainability and climate change. So not only just be aware of the existence of such courses, but also, of the careers that these courses lead to, or even normal courses. You don't have to do a course that is related directly to sustainability or climate change. Even a normal, pure sciences course or any course can lead to careers, very successful careers, new age careers that are emerging because of climate change. And this is a very fast changing field. So I think one is career counselors. Secondly, I don't think it should be just career counselors. It needs to be the whole generality of all the body of teachers. They need to be aware of how the world is changing. How, in fact, if they're not aware of it, how will they be adequately preparing students? With what kinds of skills will they be preparing students? So I think it's really important that schools, invest in the knowledge and awareness of their teachers about these issues, because education must be connected with the affairs of the age. And what more pressing affair of the age is there than climate change? It is existential. So I think that it's really important that teachers, all teachers throughout the world, in our schools and every school, connect with the issue of climate change. They are aware of, they are made aware of, they become aware of, they're assisted to become more knowledgeable about how it is changing the world, how it is changing the job market, how it is changing the opportunities for children. And in fact, when we tell parents, when we tell children that, look, these are these viable, lucrative, promising career opportunities in fields other than engineering and, medicine and law, it's also going to lead to less stress. It's going to improve mental health and well-being of young people as well, because they're being corralled into just 2 or 3 occupations or industries which are supposedly good. And so widening that, you know, uh, offering of the kinds of different subjects that they can be doing, which lead to productive, employment in new areas which are being spawned through climate change. I think that will also be universally helpful.
Thank you. I'm taking away one very critical point that you said, and I'm going to go build on it later, which is education connected with affairs of age. I think that's something which is very significant. It was quite powerful in the way you expressed this. Thank you for that, Professor Geeta. I think in the interest of time, I'm sure there are many more exciting points for us to discuss, but I think we will probably have to leave it for another time, another day. But I just wanted to thank Christine and Professor Geeta. Wonderful points that you made, extremely thought-provoking. Comes from from a deep sense of experience that you've had of bringing such very transformational programs into the curriculum in the times that you've been running these in either your school or for Christine, when she's actually designed them for the world. I think there's a lot for the educators who've been logged onto the call to take away. Personally, for me, if I were to summarize, and I know I can't do a great job summarizing all those excellent points that have been said so far, but if I were to take some key takeaways, polycrisis, how we look at climate as an interconnected set of issues. And in that context, look at what are the knowledge and skills that students would need in order for them to find the solutions. But the education systems need to be able to ramp up and to provide students the opportunities to be doing that. Professor Geeta, you talked about the multidisciplinary programs and how do we really bring that to the fore? The exciting thing that for me was the takeaway was bringing that between the curriculum and the non-curriculum. It's not necessary that this needs to sit outside as an independent program. If innovative teachers today can bring that into the science classes, into the math classes, into the eco clubs, as you mentioned, I think this just makes it a fabric that can stitch across. It does not need to sit separately at all. And I think that could make sure that the learning is accentuated and for student motivations to improve so that they can show them. Both Christine and Professor Geeta, you talked about the importance of recognition. And I think I can't overemphasize that. And I think collectively we need to find a way for the university ecosystem to recognize some of this work that's happening. We also need to find ways to recognize students for their contribution so that there's more motivation for students to come back and participate in such programs. And I think this is where I guess the education being connected with the affairs of age comes in for me truly to see how we can all stitch that together. Christine made a very important point of recontextualizing skills. And that's important because what skills we teach and learn today are not necessarily the same that are going to be important for the future. So how do we really recontextualize skills in the context of what the future generation needs to acquire, retain, and practice? I think that's important. A whole new session can be done just on recontextualization of skills, in my opinion. I think that's a point as important as that. It does point to a fact that there are so many new exciting career opportunities. So for students who want to move outside the drum roll of the usual traditional beaten path of just engineering, science, and math, I think these are exciting career opportunities where they can invest the time, look for something which is more exciting in the future that can really be something that is impactful. And lastly, I think the role of the career counselors, in order for us to demystify that, I think that's important. And today, I think students are smart. With AI and co-pilots and generative AI being available at their disposal, I'm sure they're going to get a lot of information that they can access. But I think the role of the counselor in terms of making sure that it's contextual and providing that input to the student and the parent for them to steer their thoughts towards climate as a career choice would be important. So some takeaways that I had that I just made notes of, I'm sure everyone else who's been on the call could take away a lot more. So thank you again, Christine and Professor Geeta, for those wonderful words, the contribution that you made for today's call, and no better day than the Environment Day for us to have this wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to jump to the next session in terms of, I would say, the last 5 to 7 minutes of taking the learnings from the discussions that we've just had in terms of what is Cambridge's point of view as far as climate education and climate change is concerned. We've been at the forefront. So I'd rather step back and say that, the University of Cambridge has always believed in the mission that education can transform lives, livelihoods, and societies. Good education can do this. And we've seen evidences of that happen through the hundreds of years that we've been offering education to societies. And I think this is an area where we believe climate crisis can also be empowered through education. And a lot of investment, not only in terms of our research work that we do, but also in the way we've defined education programs and outcomes have actually been coming from. One of the areas that we that we wanted to first get out to the world was the access to a high quality generic program that could be awareness oriented for all students to take up. And we started initially with the focus on students between grade 8 to grade 12. This is a program called Climate Quest. In our spirit of making sure that this is impact oriented, we wanted to make sure that there was no fee for this program. We kept it free of cost. We wanted to make sure that there was equitable access for students across any board, whether they belong to a state board in India, to a central board, to a national board, or to an international board. All of them would have equitable access to this program. The whole idea is to see how could we empower a generation of students today with the awareness that they needed on climate education and the climate change through education, therefore going deeper and investing their time more to be looking at serious career choices related to climate. Over time, we intend to strengthen this program, make it age appropriate. We would like to bring that into also different disciplines. But the start of this was to make sure that we provided a program for any school across any board to take up. So Climate Quest really, it was, and I think the salient part of this Climate Quest program that it was designed in partnership with the Cambridge University. So we have an initiative called Cambridge Zero. That's the university's perspective to say, how do we really tackle the climate crisis that we have? And a significant amount of research is being done through this initiative called Climate Zero. So Christine's sponsorship helped us get some of our research scholars from Cambridge Zero to create this wonderful program. The feedback that we've had from initial pilot set of students who took it was wonderful in terms of what it provided them in context to what they would not have got from the public domain. And so this is a really good program for students to take up that could help them make decisions in terms of how serious they would be about investing their time and their future towards a climate-related cause. This comes with its own recognition. We give them a certificate of completion where it's co-signed by the Cambridge University's Department of or Cambridge Zero, along with Cambridge University Press and Assessment. There's a little bit of motivation for students to be taking that up. It's also very comprehensive because it combines, self-paced learning along with periodic assessments to making sure that students are able to stay on course with this program. It's a 9 to 10 hour program, doesn't take too long to finish, but it's really, really thought-provoking in terms of what students can gain from that. Why should students really participate in that? Because one, it creates more awareness of the challenges that we have with climate change. It prompts them to look at action. It prompts them to think about becoming more, environmentally conscious. It prompts them to look at fostering a sense of responsibility towards sustainability. It also enables the teachers and the students to work together as partners to ensuring that they can look at small solutions in their context in a school. Simple things like turning off light bulbs or fans, or making sure that, they are able to provide for solar panels in their classrooms. All of these are areas where students and teachers can participate in small ways to ensure that there's impact created in their local context over there. It also enhances, the methodology of teaching with real life application scenarios. So this is something that I'm sure all of you on the call today will find it interesting, and we would urge you to look at, understanding more of this. It has basically 4 modules. There is a module that focuses on the cause and effects. There is a module that focuses on what the impact of those causes and effects are. It talks about how we could think about addressing climate change, which is the solutions that we could think about. So all of these are areas where students will find practical guidance in terms of what this means for them. So I'm just going to ask my team here to play a short video of what Climate Quest means. So all of you have a chance to also view this.
In the vastness of space, our home faces an unprecedented crisis. Rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and melting ice caps. The toll of climate change is evident. Climate change has brought this planet and its inhabitants to the edge of a cliff. How do we save us and ours from this calamity we collectively face? Quality education will be crucial in our mission to address climate change. Our national education policy emphasizes the need for tackling local and regional environmental challenges while promoting environmental conservation and sustainability. Given the context, Cambridge introduces an innovative initiative, Cambridge Climate Quest, our climate education program for young learners. We embark on a journey towards designing a climate education program. This will help them to maximize awareness about the magnitude of climate change amongst the youth, equip learners with the knowledge and tools to try and find solutions to these problems, facilitate informed decision-making and action-oriented engagement, and eventually drive climate action. Cambridge Climate Quest extends beyond classrooms, aiming to forge a strong bond between learners and the environment. Education is critical as we navigate our path towards a sustainable tomorrow. Cambridge Climate Quest. Educate, empower, act.
Thank you very much. And in case you're interested in being part of this program, again, to reiterate that this is completely, free of cost. This is accessible to anyone across any board, for all students between grade 8 to 12. I think this is where I think they would value this awareness program the most. So if you believe that you would like to join this program, we'll share this link on the screen now where you could write in to register. So if I may just request the team to switch to the screen where the link is available for them to join, or is it the QR code that we're going to be using, Shaumitri?
We will quickly switch to the
Please.
screen with the link. Yes.
Thank you.
So while we do that, thank you so much, Arun, Christine, Professor Gandhi, for your wonderful insights. And we were hoping that this conversation would never end. However, we are also brimming with questions. There are some very, very interesting questions as well as insights that we have received from our audience. Unfortunately, due to paucity of time, we will not be able to address all of them, but we promise to come back to you with appropriate responses to keep the engagement going. However, I will quickly try to get a few across to each of you and get some quick inputs and responses. The first one from Talib Said, and he is interested to know that how can I, as a teacher, educate children about environmental issues since they are not often highlighted enough as compared to some other issues. Christine, may I request you to take this up?
So in terms of how to educate children, I think it's about and do sort of modify me, Sumitri, if I'm not answering the question appropriately. But I think it's about age appropriacy, finding things that are of relevance and interest at any age. And again, that's something that as Cambridge we're working on at the moment, how to really signpost what is appropriate, what is possible at what age, in terms of building understanding and engagement, and building that interest and engagement. And we've talked about motivation quite a lot today, and I think it is really about finding that motivation in our students that drive their interest to carry on through later in their educational journeys.
Thanks, Christine. I think a part of Said's question was also about how do we bring to the forefront the environmental issues when we are anyway faced with so many other issues that the environmental issues kind of get sidelined.
Yeah, so I would add to that. I think it is about integration, and again, if it's about the challenges to bring this into the classroom when there are so many other things that we need to bring into the classroom, I think that is about this responsibility that we have to integrate this so that so as a board that we support our teachers and our schools in terms of their delivery of the curriculum. So I think there's a support aspect that we need to help with there, which is what we're working on at the moment in terms of how to signpost where we are addressing, where we are integrating environmental issues, concepts, ideas, solutions within our curriculum.
Thank you so much, Christine. Moving on very quickly, this is a very focused question from Chitranjali from Dears Convent School. And she is asking that how can one implement environmental education in primary classes? So her specific query is how can we implement this in primary classes? And Professor Gandhi, if I may request you to please take this up.
Yeah, I think that there are two or three ways. I'll mention two that I can think of straight off. One is, of course, in a non-curricular manner, for example, through school assemblies, morning assembly, sharing age-appropriate data about it in the right way. For example, not in an alarmist way, not in a way that leads to worry, but in an appropriate manner, sharing the data about it, making students aware about it. Secondly, more in a and sharing case studies, not just theoretically, this is what the world looks like, this is where the global warming is happening, but also about what are some of the things that are being done to mitigate those concerns. For example, the advent of electric vehicles, the carbon capture technology. Those things may be appropriate for slightly older children, maybe not for primary, but never in such a way that children become unduly worried about something. Secondly, I think in a more curricular manner, I think the modality of the experiential learning project is a really good one for primary age children. Because if it's whatever is in the curriculum, for example, in geography or in environmental science, most certainly there will be connects of that content with climate change. So, for example, if there's anything to do with the weather cycle or anything to do with some topic in primary school science, chemistry, or geography, when that is brought together as a question, some inquiry has to be held by the students. They have to work collaboratively, 4 or 5 students in a group. They have to address a particular question. So in order to address that question, they are given some references, some reading, very age appropriate reading. And then based on that reading, they have to consult and come up with their solutions and their perspectives. And then they have to write it down. So English, the writing part is integrated. Computing, perhaps because they have to type it in, maybe to some extent, especially grades 4 and 5 children. They have to type in the thing. So maybe they have to make a small PowerPoint presentation. So computing comes in, English comes in, geography elements, which have deliberately been brought in, and maybe mathematics that has been brought in, but climate-related mathematics. So, for example, when you convert from Fahrenheit to centigrade, maybe at grade 5, grade 6 level, you're learning those things. So I think that it's those ways in which you can make it more mainstreamed. Climate education is mainstreamed through the modality of the experiential learning projects.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Gandhi. And that was wonderful and so practical. Unfortunately, we will have to close because we have overshot time. Again, we will come back to you with responses to your questions, and we promise to keep the engagement going because, as they say, there is no better time than now to prioritize climate education. Thank you so much for your time, for participating, and have a good day.